All right. Welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg as Chuck takes a seat. Great to see you, Chuck. Thank you so much for joining me today at short notice as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Hal.
All right, Chuck, of course, you can see it. Chuck Pennacchio, he is a founder, one of the co-founders of OnePayerStates.org, and they're fighting tooth and nail to ensure that we have a much better healthcare system. Also working with AmericanFascists.us as well. There's a lot of information, by the way. I put links to Chuck, OnePayerStates.org in the show description. So folks who are watching, who are interested in getting involved, they can do so just by clicking on those links, including joining your monthly call tomorrow at noon. I'm going to try to, well, I can't do it because I've got a show, but I'm going to try to check it out when I can. How is One Payer States doing?
We are in transition. I'm going to be taking a different role going forward. I need to step back as president of the organization and stepping back as our lobbyist here in Washington, D.C. I think we're healthy. Our board members are very committed to our work, our mission, our vision, which, as you know, centers on the theory of change that we're most likely to get to national Medicare for all by adopting and modeling single-payer systems at the state level. So 1, 2, 3 states, even a regional compact is the way forward, we believe, to getting us to a national solution. So our organization is doing well, I think. We could always use more resources. We're an all-volunteer group, but, I think we've got a real strategy, and we want to share that with the world. We want other folks in the social justice world, and particularly in single-payer activists, to understand and see our vision and how that is a prerequisite for building a strategy to actually win. Yeah, I'll stop there.
I think it's great work that you do. It's incredibly valuable. I think that single-payer, one-payer healthcare really would, if it somehow could be pushed through a few important states, could lead a real renaissance of the left. And we were debating even what left means, but I think we can agree that it would really lead to a movement that could really make a difference in American life for so many millions of Americans.
Oh, absolutely. It's a cornerstone of economic justice, of social justice, 100%. Yep. So we work.
So you've been pushing the state-based SABUCA, State-Based Universal Health Care Act, and you and I've also discussed whether it's essential or whether states could still pass some type of single payer without it. Is that process going forward, even with Trump in the White House and Republicans in control of Congress?
No, right now it's a bottleneck, and it's even very difficult to get a serious audience with our Democratic legislative leaders. They're preoccupied with other activities, seeing themselves in the minority, in the House of Representatives and in the Senate. This is time we're talking about Ro Khanna in the House as our leader on the State-Based Universal Health Care Act. And we more recently recruited Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts to lead the bill in the Senate. And we did a rollout, as you remember, in mid-July. That was very powerful because what we are doing is we're organizing across the country. And one of our key people, Carrie Reingants, who's a state representative carrying our single-payer bill in Michigan, she's organizing the legislators, the legislative leaders across the country. This is extraordinary. And we're working together on that project. And more than that, Hal, she wants to create what has never existed on the political left or in the progressive left, which is an ALEC type organization, which would bring together not just healthcare issues, but modeling other solutions, childcare we talked about, housing, climate, just any number of gun violence issues. All these issues can be and solutions should be shared among those who are progressive thinkers. ALEC, as most folks probably know, American Legislative Exchange Council is a right-wing consortium. It's a place where right-wing ideas are replicated across the country. For example, right to work, which is anti-union. I mean, that's the product of the work that goes back to the early 70s when really this crusade, this right-wing crusade that's now resulted in fascism in our government, was originally launched by Justice Powell, the so-called Powell Memo of 1971. That's the origin, and there's never been a response by progressives to create that kind of an infrastructure, a place where we can all meet, share ideas. Again, whether it's healthcare or housing or climate, that's really in war, warfare. We've got to stop this global warfare where we really have just a one-party system. But yeah, I'm very excited about the work that we're doing right now and the organizing we're doing, in spite of all of the sort of negative developments, with the growth of ICE, with the growth again of fascism, the giveaway of trillions of dollars to the super rich, and then taking food out of the mouths of children and healthcare away from people who are desperate. So yeah, despite all those negative things, I'm actually excited about the positive work that we're doing to build, to organize, to create a future that once we get past this horrible period of time, sort of the equivalent of Project 2029. What are we going to do? Once the power switch goes the other direction, we have got to have an agenda that we can go full speed ahead on.
All right. Well, Chuck, you know what? You walk right into my into my wheelhouse, I guess. This is good news with Hal and Chuck giving the silver line right now to the dark cloud of the Trump era. There's really important organizing going on, the left united in important ways that could lead to some significant improvements in life quality, especially after we get through this very, very unfortunate period that we're in right now. I do want your take on a number of different issues. We talk about good news. Maybe it's not all good news. Yesterday, I did a program about the situation in the Middle East and Palestine and addressing this Trump peace plan, and it certainly got his fingerprints all over it. And I expressed a kind of a mixed view. There's a lot to dislike. It would certainly be one of the last ways that I would try to bring about an end to the murders, the killing by Israel in Gaza and in Palestine, but I guess better than the bombs falling. Can you answer that question? What's your take? Is this plan that's been in the news lately, that the UN just approved, is it a solution? Could it lead to something better for the people of Gaza and the West Bank, or is it, as I rather grimly and dramatically put, the final solution for them in the end?
It's the jury's out. It's hard to see forward much, with this initiative. It has, as you indicated, silver linings to it, but it does nothing to undo the damage that's already been done. And if it doesn't point us to a Palestinian state, then what's the point? If it doesn't point us to, what I still call for a two-state solution. Other people talk about a one-state solution. But if it doesn't lead to Palestinian sovereignty, where they have autonomy and control over their lives going forward, then what has been the entire point of this exercise, of this destruction that's been going on, this genocide? So I always go forward with radical hope, but that means that my eyes are wide open. I need to look at, and we need to look at a real strategy for how we can envision a future where the Middle East is not really under the thumb of the Israeli state, and that's really that's what the focus has got to be on. We've got to reverse this and put Israel back into its place, its rightful place, and then provide again avenues of autonomy for Arab states, and get back to peace. Stop these perpetual wars. Stop the role of the mostly American-based military-industrial complex, which just keeps feeding and funneling destruction across much of the world, especially in the Middle East. So I'm hopeful, but we'll have to see.
All right, you're watching Halitics with Chuck and Hal. Hal and Chuck, call it what you like. Subscribe, please. We are seeing growth in the subscription base, Chuck, which always puts a little wind in my sails. So I want to continue that positive trend. And obviously having you on, friend of Halitics, Chuck Pennacchio, is great. So thank you so much. Chuck, one of my issues, and you know me for a while, so you know I have all sorts of issues, is that I'm not always great at listening, but I'm really listening rapidly to what you're saying because you're bringing a perspective that's hard, that I have had trouble embracing, that there are, as you said, radical hope is out there and we have to have eyes wide open. But let me just throw a little, I don't want to even say douse you, but a little sort of maybe dose of what I would call reality. And this is something that Brianna Joy Gray, one of my favorite podcasters, was pointing out, that she's sort of getting frustrated with the idea we've just got to organize more, we've got to do more, we've got to convince people. If we can just convince the voters, we can win. Her point was, hey, we've already convinced voters. People already are against Israel. 7%, 8% of the Democrats actually support Israel at this point. We've seen survey after survey, despite all the attacks on one-payer healthcare by the media, by the bought and paid for corporate media, by politicians, it's still a policy that Americans want. And same with $15, $20, $25 minimum wage. And yet our politicians do not respond to us. So does that signify, as you indicated, that we're kind of in fascism already or close to it, where the corporations are controlling Washington to a point where what the people want really doesn't matter?
Yeah, I mean, all of your analysis there and others points are well made there. But I would say that electoral politics is not enough, and it's not even close to enough. And unfortunately, that's how we are conditioned in our society to think, and certainly the Democratic Party leadership and the vast majority of the Democrats, as well as Republicans, they lean so hard into election cycles, and that's their frame of reference. Like, let's see what happens in 2026, then we'll tell you. That's not the way you build strategy. You don't look to winning the next election and then begin the conversation about how we move forward. It's got to be done in the present. In other words, there is no vision that's guiding the Democratic Party. There is a vision that has been guiding the Republican Party. And again, I made reference to the Powell memo back in 1971 and Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation 900-page plus document, detailed document on how they're going to just capture the government, eviscerate the bureaucracy, destroy the public goods, healthcare, housing, transportation, all of that. I mean, they have a vision for just tearing it all down. The Democrats don't really have a vision for building it back up, just sort of getting back to what they call the status quo, right? Which is, let's get back to where we were before Trump and everything's going to be fine. Well, that's precisely the wrong way to think about it, because what happened where we got, before Trump gave us Trump. That was the point. And unless there was an actual vision centered on justice, and as you put it, getting the ears back to understanding and listening to the actual people. I think there's good news. We talked about this a little bit. I think Ro Khanna is actually paving a new kind of politics, and he's finally getting good attention on this. And I think in some ways he sort of stumbled into it, with the whole Epstein file and working with Thomas Massie, and as you pointed out, bringing in Marjorie Taylor Greene and Nancy Mace and Lauren Boebert. And now, it was a near unanimous vote in the House, a unanimous vote in the Senate, and it's not just the release of the files, but it's important that that investigation go forward, that we out these power brokers, those who have dominated our politics, our culture, our media. So this could be a real turning point. I'm not throwing all my eggs into this basket, but there is some hope here. And beyond that, what Khan is doing is he's going into red areas of the country, very conservative areas that had voted for Trump in the last election. And he's really listening intentionally and really listening deeply to what it is that has caused people to feel so alienated. And you and I both know this, that back in 2016, that 20% of the voters who were with Bernie in the primary ended up voting for Trump in the general election. Right? I mean, there is an economic populism that is very powerful, that kind of a message. And Kana calls it economic patriotism, which is another way of riffing on the same idea. But if we don't address people's basic economic needs, everything else falls by the wayside. Then the culture wars take over and keep us divided and scared of each other and allow the fascism to grow. So we need to, you and I, other social justice thinkers and organizers need to lean hard into creating a strategy based on a vision, based on our shared values, based on seeing a future of universal justice, and then ask ourselves, how did we get there from a future perspective? Look backward. You say, like, let's say 20, 30, 40 years from now, when we've accomplished all the goals that are so dear and near to our hearts.
Well, what I say to the social justice warriors, and I'm a fitful social justice warrior. I'm a social justice warrior on some issues. I'm a cultural warrior on some cultural issues, and not others. But what I say to them is the way you win your issues is by winning economic justice. You will be able to persuade working class Americans, at least many of them, some of them, if you're right or if your arguments are powerful, you'll be able to convince them when they feel that they're being treated fairly, that they have enough, and that no one is taking advantage of them, exploiting them, that their children will have the same opportunities that the wealthy, the children of the affluent will have. Then you will have a much, much more willing audience for your cause for trans rights, just to take one, or for immigrant rights, which I think are very important. But people are thinking of their belly first, and an empty belly is not a recipe for a willing listener to somebody else's problems.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think the future is based on understanding when we were successful in the past, and that really centers on a lot on two things that FDR introduced us to, right? Which is the four freedoms, as well as the Economic Bill of Rights. And the Economic Bill of Rights helped to funnel into the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is a 1948 document. I think we've talked about this on the program before, but that was the shared vision of the world.
Freedom from want, I believe. The four freedoms, freedom from want is the one that jumps out at me. And I can't remember the other ones, but
freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom to worship or not worship, right? So freedom of religion or non-religion, as well as freedom of assembly, speech, First Amendment. So those are the four cornerstones that he referred to as the four freedoms. I think it's a good place to start. But to your point, I'm 100% with you. If you don't provide economic stability and certainty and in people's lives, they're easy prey, right, for the divisive politics, the cultural politics. You made reference to immigrants and trans or LGBTQ folks. Those then become the grievance politics that people are just they're taught to be angry at the other, right? They're taught to be angry at people who don't look like them or worship like them or act like them or dress like them. There is that alienation factor. I mean, this is also right out of Hitler's playbook. This is exactly the way that he was able to divide German society and paralyze them with fear and terror, and take the world to a catastrophic war. And that's if we don't hit the brakes here, and that means somehow finding those spines. But it's really up to us. It's got to be a mass movement. We cannot, as you know, and I share with you, the Democratic Party is not an opposition party. It's not built for this moment. And certainly the leadership of the party, which I think you want to talk about a little bit as well, is extremely problematic. They don't recognize the fascism that's coming at us and is growing, and it is here. I think we need to be absolutely clear. And also, I'm happy to define any of these terms just to be clear about what it is that we're talking about, so we're not just throwing words around.
All right, we'll get into that in just a moment. But we did also mention the Epstein files as good news, and I agree with you 100%. But I wanted you just to weigh in on what I highlighted here. It is good news. The directive is to release all the materials, but there is this loophole The Justice Department, which is run by, a Trump loyalist of the, first water, Pam Bondi, can withhold files that relate to active criminal investigations or, and this is, I think, the big or, are deemed to invade personal privacy. Have you thought about whether, and I know we've heard that there's real fear that they're going to, that loophole is going to swallow the rule, right? That exception will swallow the rule. Do you think that's likely?
The attempt is more than likely. It's certain. I don't think there's any question about that, Trump has made it absolutely paramount that he have loyalists, incompetent as they are. That's also part of the point. The head of these major agencies and in our government, but Pam Bondi in particular, he's weaponized the Justice Department. And there is a tradition in our society where there needs to be separation, between the executive branch of government and these agencies of government, in particular the Justice Department, that they not be weaponized, they not be partisan. But right now, I think it's certain that that's going to be the attempt, whether they get away with it or not, in terms of actually keeping Trump protected and making sure that files that relate to him are not released, as well as his billionaire friends and so forth. So we're hardly out of the woods, but the ball is rolling in the right direction. And I think it's up to us, right? It's up to the massive population to continue to pressure, and demand that justice be done on behalf of the victims, on behalf of these now women who were young girls, who were taken to a rape island.
Well, and some are now dead, like Virginia Giuffre, who died as a result of the trauma that was inflicted on her. Chuck, just to jump in real quick on this, I think what gives me some hope that there will be a significant amount of materials released that do pertain to Trump is the bipartisan nature of the of the congressional movement to release them that Khanna built, and the fact that you do have these high-profile Republican women as well as Thomas Massie pushing hard, and I just don't think they're going to be putting up with just 100-page or 1,000-page dump where virtually every page is completely redacted. I would note also what we're seeing on the right, not just the electeds, but the MAGA movement has to a significant degree turned on Trump because of this issue and because of the full-on support for Israel. And that, I think, is something we should be very grateful for, because I think it makes it much harder for us to envision, for me to envision Trump somehow finagling another 4 years or a permanent stay in the Oval Office until he's carried out feet first.
Yeah. There are fissures here, and when you, again, for the political right, when you lose Joe Rogan, and he is sort of a bellwether, right? He's somebody who, if he starts asking serious questions and starts turning on Trump, that gives license, that gives a green light to any number of other right-wing podcasters to begin sort of chipping away at that, I guess you would say right-wing solidarity support, of Trump. And I see some hope here on this. And I think what we're going to be seeing, what we will be seeing, is like a drip, 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 drip. This is not going to go away. This is going to dominate our politics, certainly between now and the 2026 midterm, if not beyond, probably leaning all the way into the 2028 presidential. But I don't want to look too far into these elections. I think we have so much work to be done now. And this is the work that you and I and others, again, in the social justice movement need to be focused on, is the more we put our eggs in that basket of the election, which is in itself being rigged, as we all know. I mean, it's being rigged by the right wing, that to count on that election cycle, that election outcome, is very dangerous. Having said that, we're coming off of an off-year election when we had some very good news that indicated that the American people are waking up. They're angry, and they recognize that this fascist state that's coming at us needs to be pushed it needs to be buried. It needs to be done with. It needs to be crushed. So I see some real good signs. We were talking about Mamdani. We were talking about Katie Wilson. Those are all good. I think those are all good signs. But we still have to keep doing the work, and that means building the strategy, building the vision, and building around our shared values.
Katie Wilson, self-described Democratic Socialist mayor-elect in Seattle. The announcement made earlier, I guess yesterday or a few days ago, took them quite a while to count all the votes there, but she did win, and I think that's a positive development. I mean, absolutely, we're talking about good news. But before we get into Katie Wilson, you did mention Democratic leaders, the problem with the Democratic leadership. And this is a thumbnail I did yesterday for a video that actually just sort of took off. I just looked at the numbers. I'm very pleased. A lot of people are actually watching this. And you can see their leader, Jeffries, thanking two progressive darlings, if I may call them that. Not really my favorite AOC, but she's certainly perceived as one of the most, I guess, outspoken leftists. And we talk about terms or progressives in Congress. And Zohran Mamdani, for whom I walked. I mean, I spent a lot of time, effort. I knocked doors. I climbed towers in New York City to elect Zohran Mamdani. And now both of those two are dissuading Chi Osei, who is a Brooklyn council member who endorsed Zohran very early on, who has been very critical of Israel and has been and is a member of DSA, like the two on the bottom. And yet they both are saying, no, we don't think it's the time to primary Jeffries. I find this very, I don't know, upsetting, angering, frustrating. What's your reaction to this story, Chuck?
Yeah, I have to say it's not surprising because I think we did talk about this a little bit yesterday in brief, which is that, Mamdani did get Jeffries' somewhat backhanded endorsement, but it was an endorsement. It was a late endorsement. And, there may have been a quiet understanding that with that endorsement came an understanding that Mamdani would not support Osei, the challenger to Jeffries. And that word may have gotten over to AOC as well. That's conjecture, but all I'm going to say is that politics is politics, and I don't get upset with individuals when they make decisions. Look, I'm from the state of Pennsylvania, and I've had to live with John Fetterman since for the last 2 years, and that is just over the top crazy stuff, and yet I can't say I'm surprised because I know John Fetterman. I know him going back many, many years. Nothing he's done has surprised me. I can't say I know AOC or Mamdani personally, but, AOC was recruited by the Justice Democrats to challenge another leader, somebody who was in a position possibly to become the future Speaker of the House for the Democrats, Joe Crowley. And now that the shoe's on the other foot, she's sort of walked back what it was that got her in power to begin with, right? Which was challenging a Democratic leader. And I hesitate to even use the word leader here. These are people who are at the top of the heap, but if they don't seem to have a clear understanding of what leadership is, which is actually building a strategy and working to deliver the goods that are core to your needs of the constituency. But again, follow the money. That's usually the answer to most questions. Follow the money. But the political calculation, we are where we are right now. We are in the midst of a ongoing fascist coup. That I dated back to January 6th, right, 2021. That's when, in my mind, this fascist coup actually began to unfold, and it's continuing to roll forward. But there are good signs on the horizon, and the failure to endorse Osei, honestly, it's just not a big surprise to me.
Well, I was surprised a little bit. And in the video, which folks are certainly welcome to watch, it's right there in Halitics. Right. I hope you do. I make the point that I do think there was an understanding, and maybe it was even explicit, where Jeffries said to Mamdani, I'll endorse you, and let's face it, you'll benefit from my endorsement. Maybe not a lot of votes, but some votes, made the point it could have got him over that 50% hurdle, which was a big deal, which is a big deal because now he really can claim a mandate from a majority of voters, which he could not have had he wound up with 48, 49%. So I do think, frankly, Jeffries' endorsement did help Zoran at least a little bit, given how close he was to just over 50%. I do think there probably was some, explicit agreement that he would not endorse a challenge. Maybe AOC was part of that. Maybe he said to both of them, if you want, we're not going to play any games here. Zoran agrees not to approve a challenge to my leadership, but AOC has to agree also, or I'm not going to endorse you. Maybe that was done. My answer to that is fine. Go ahead, give in, get the endorsement, and then as soon as you're elected, you backtrack. Yeah. You go to the American people and said, yeah, you know what? I did tell Jeffries. I said, I will not support a challenge to your leadership if you endorse me, but I'm going to support it anyway because the American people come first. And these kind of backroom deals are terrible for our democracy. Yeah. And frankly, Hakeem Jeffries is terrible for our democracy.
I'm not going to argue that at all. I mean, I think we're pretty close to the same analysis, but I think it's important to also put this in the context of, again, I keep repeating it, but I'm going to keep saying it until it gets riveted in people's brains, is that we're in the midst of a fascist takeover of our government and society. And it's basically captured 2/3 of the world. Oh yeah, by the way, right? The growth of authoritarianism, especially right-wing fascist authoritarianism. I mean, Trump just entertained the MSB, the Saudi murderer, who himself is a functioning fascist, as is Netanyahu. I mean, the list goes on. But the point is that in the midst of a fascist coup, and maybe this was the thinking of AOC and Mamdani, it's more dangerous to take down your leader, whether you like them or not, whether you think they're effective or not, in the midst of this crisis. So that I'm not arguing that's the position I would take, but it is understandable. If you can see my point, is that Jeffries, again, whether you like him or not, and I'm no fan, as you know, he is currently the leader of the House. And you just live with it until you get, again, I mean, this is the mindset, until we get through the next election cycle, and then we see what happens.
Well, let me just push back just a tiny little bit, Chuck, and then we'll move on. I would posit that Jeffries is part of the reason we have Trump. I would say that if you want to defeat Trump, you're better off replacing Jeffries with Chio Say in that seat and then electing a leader who actually does not appear to be and isn't, in fact, enthralled to Wall Street and Israel.
Well, let's talk about that other Wall Street leader, right, in the Democratic Party, Chuck Schumer. He's also, as we know, very problematic. I mean, you've got the leaders of the House and Senate are New York Wall Street Democrats. That in itself is a mouthful. That says so much just right there. So I'm fundamentally, I'm with you. I'm trying to be, just objectively as much as I can, analyzing the situation, understanding why it is what it is. I think all primaries are healthy. I think every candidate should be primaried. Every candidate across the board. That if you want a functioning democracy, that should be the rule of in play, right? That should be everywhere, ideally, right? That should just be, it should be unspoken. Like that's
and let me, again, especially in a two-party system, right? If we had a multi-party democracy and the Democrats wanted to keep putting the same old tired faces up, then it would be less problematic because they could face challenges from other parties, and maybe not just one other party, but several other parties from left, right, center. Yeah, but 100%. We don't have that.
Right. We're not a fully functioning democracy. Far from it. I think we can agree. But just to set aside the personalities and the particulars, it needs to be. We need to keep churning. We need to be competitive. We need to have conversations. I mean, Thomas Jefferson, famously said that that we need to renew our revolution every 20, 25 years or so. We got to but it needs to be ongoing, right? Every generation needs to regenerate, needs to renew, our commitment to the promise of the Declaration. That's what it is. The Declaration of Independence it's a promise. It's a promissory note. When it says all men, and I add women, are created equal and are endowed, with inalienable rights and so forth, that's a promise, and we're not living up to it. And the problem is that the money is captured, and has captured the system. And a lot of this, again, is rooted in the ability of the right wing to function and build organization and infrastructure coming out of the 1971 Lewis Powell memo. I encourage people to take a look at it. It's a short document, but it helps to explain how we got to the 942-page document, I think it is, with the Heritage Foundation today, which is a full-blown explosion of what it is that they tried to do, beginning in the early 1970s. Lewis Powell was rewarded with a Supreme Court seat after he delivered the goods. And he pointed the way for how the right wing was going to take it over. And in many ways, I think it's spun out of control, even beyond the ability of the billionaire class, the ruling class of right wingers, many of whom were Democrats.
Well, and let me again jump in. That's what happened with the Nazis too, right? Hitler had his billionaire. Maybe they weren't billionaires compared to today, but they were the uber rich in Germany who backed him, and they saw pretty quickly, many of them, that this was not working out for them. I think some were murdered, right? He killed some of his wealthy benefactors afterwards because they weren't fully invested in the National Socialist program. So
Absolutely. Or they were jailed, or they were they went into exile. Absolutely. The so-called conservative ruling class of Germany thought they could control Hitler. They thought that they grossly underestimated him, and they grossly underestimated the fascist movement that he was leading. And I think that's problematic right now. I think the Democrats are kind of the equivalent in some ways of that conservative mindset, which is to say, oh, it's not going to spin out of control. Oh, this, that, and I've been warning about this. This. This is what I've been studying since I was a teenager. The parallels between American history and German history, the discussion around democracy and totalitarianism, and how we get into how we end up in one direction or the other, and it's taking your eye off the ball and not understanding what's in front of us. And a lot of that has to do, again, with seeing things clearly. Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, as you know, in 1923-24 when he was jailed for sedition, and that was his blueprint. And people didn't take it seriously. They didn't take it seriously. I think Winston Churchill was one who did, and of course he comes along much later to leadership in the UK. But the point is that people don't take seriously what's actually in front of them, and that includes Project 2025. I don't think enough people took it seriously, and that in fact is what's rolling on us right now.
Well, thanks for the good news, Chuck. I thought this was about the good news.
It's not good or bad. But I think there is some current developments that are promising. And look, people are turning out in the streets too. Let's keep that in mind. I don't think there's a strategy.
Right. That's the problem. Is there's no we're turning on the streets because this is what we're demanding. That's what we're not really seeing. And I think we do need that. I wanted to circle back to something when we were talking about one-payer states, and you said something very interesting to me about interstate compacts, right? So maybe a smaller state doesn't have the full benefit of a very large risk pool, could work with another state. And what immediately jumped into my mind, I don't know if you've thought of this, and I don't see it happening, but why not Maryland and Pennsylvania? I mean, Pennsylvania's a pretty good sized state, but add the Maryland 7.5 million. You have two Democratic governors who are being touted as potential saviors of the party, potential presidential nominees in 2028, Wes Moore and Josh Shapiro. Why not have those two agree, go to their legislatures and say, hey, let's have Maryland, Pennsylvania healthcare?
Sure. I mean, there's actually, I think you might know, or folks might know, that because of the failure of the CDC, States are taking vaccine scheduling issues in hand, right? They're beginning to build bridges on the West Coast. There are 4 states, California, Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii, are collaborating on vaccine schedules. And to me, that is a potential forward step, ultimately, to universal health care. Like, why stop at vaccines, right? Why stop there? Let's just go all in. Maryland has a good model for funding single payer healthcare. It's the hospital
All payer system.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are some good ideas out there. Connecticut has done actually quite remarkable things with Medicaid. Most people aren't paying attention to this, but Connecticut actually has some really good models that can lean into a single payer solution. But right now on the East Coast, from Delaware up to Maine, with the exception of New Hampshire, all the states between Delaware and Maine, which of course includes Maryland and Pennsylvania, are in conversation about how we handle the vaccine issue, in particular. But what's to stop them from doing bulk purchasing of medical equipment? What's to stop them from doing bulk purchasing of pharmaceuticals? What's to stop them from collaborating in any number of ways that will ultimately get us to a universal healthcare system, regional, two states working together, or 3 or 4 more states working together. So let's be creative here. I mean, this really is our history.
Those are great points, Chuck. I mean, you're doing really good work, and you have a lot. Chuck, of course, folks may not know this, did run for Senate in Pennsylvania, U.S. Senate. Lost, I think that was when Rick Santorum, right, was ultimately the winner one of the times you ran.
Well, no, actually, that was Bob Casey. Who defeated Rick Santorum at the end of that election cycle. It was 2006, and but I choose to think that I didn't lose. I choose to believe that we built a single payer movement across the state of Pennsylvania, which has morphed now into a national state-based campaign, under the guise of one payer states. So, when people run for office, I think it's important to take the long view of what that means. If you're all in it, if it's just running for office and then it's like one and done, then that's a missed opportunity. I didn't see it that way. We were able to create movement across the state by running hard on anti-war issues. I was foursquare for ending the Iraq War immediately. I supported a living wage. I supported, the full throttle, reproductive rights, which were all in opposition to Bob Casey, who ultimately wins against Santorum. But nonetheless, we were able to build a movement out of that run for office. So I take the positive view, and that's being strategic, right? That's saying, okay, Chuck, you're running against this behemoth, Bob Casey, who is a household name in the state of Pennsylvania, who, by the way, just lost this election in the last cycle, to a guy who was a carpetbagger. I mean, Dave McCormick lives in Connecticut. He came to Pennsylvania. He ran and defeated Casey. So it's just, and I would argue that that's fundamentally Casey's inability to run with a populist economic agenda. He was always sort of picking at the edges, very moderate to conservative, slow to come around to supporting, anything approaching reproductive rights. But nonetheless, we have to look at what we're doing strategically. We have to see it as part of a process, of a project that builds us to an ultimate universal justice society.
Yeah, I agree with you about Bob Casey. In some ways, he tried to present himself as populist. He did tout his support for unions. He was not, he wasn't by in any way the worst Democrat, but ultimately, I think your take is very correct. He was too centrist at a time when people are upset, they're frustrated, they're angry, they don't want more of the same. That's what happened. Did Sherrod Brown in as well. A lot of people like Sherrod Brown, but again, he really wasn't able to take on his party leadership. And I would just add one other point. Sure. Even when you have good Democrats, if leadership is bad, then it can take it takes them down too. Because people say, well, what good are they? They're not doing me anything.
Yeah. As bad as Trump is doing and the Republicans in terms of popularity, the Democrats are even more underwater. This is both. It's a pox on both parties at this point. People are really angry, and understandably so. They feel like they're not being listened to, which again is I would encourage people to take a look at or listen to Ro Khanna's interview that he did the other day with the New York Times, and just take a listen and see what at least an innovative Democrat, a progressive, somebody who is out there really listening intentionally. This is, I think, the whole thing. This is why Bernie was so popular, is that he doesn't hesitate. He didn't hesitate. He's made West Virginia his second home, if you haven't noticed. Bernie Sanders.
No, I
That's
agree.
really brilliant. West Virginia is going to flip. I can almost guarantee it in the next 5-10 years. It's going to become one of the most progressive states in the country, I believe.
Economically, but of course that the Democrats have got. I think that the fly in the ointment there is, will the Democrats allow themselves to be dragged kicking and screaming into a more populist economic place? And I'm skeptical. I'm not radically hopeful about that.
Okay. The conditions in West Virginia, I mean, Bernie recognizes the conditions in West Virginia are so far over the top. And I mean, this is throughout all of Appalachia, right? This is where J.D. Vance is from. He recognizes that just going to the base, just going to the voters, that there's going to be a rebellion, and there is a rebellion. And frankly, in West Virginia, the Democratic Party structure is really quite weak, right? I think it's right
because of Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin pretty much destroyed the Democratic Party. And here's what I'm saying is, if you get a true populist, a coal miner, but a Democratic union type leader, coal miner who's going to fight for working people, I think they would have a great chance to win. But again, if you get more Manchins, and I know his daughter is big in West Virginia politics now, I think that's where the party would continue. I don't see a movement arising from the ashes, the coal ashes, unless you have a strong progressive populist running.
We'll see. I mean, that's why I'm not saying tomorrow this is going to happen, but I see it building. And like Graham Plattner up in Maine, right? Are you following him at all?
Yeah, I was going to go there. Now I promised Chuck we talk about Katie Wilson in Seattle, but sure. I don't know if you saw this piece. This is about Maine. A surprising state could help Dems win the Senate. Actually, they're talking about Alaska. He is Bruni, but he mentions Plattner. So talk a little bit about Plattner, and then I want to give you the New York Bruni's take on Plattner, Janet Mills, and Susan Collins. But yeah, where were you going with that?
I mean, he's sort of the Maine equivalent of a coal miner, right? I mean, he's somebody who is he's an oyster guy, right? He's an oyster man. He grows
oyster farmer, oyster farmer, harvester.
Yeah, he's a veteran, and of course, he had the problematic issue with the I guess the what do they call it, the Totenkopf, the
Totenkopf, yeah.
Yeah, it's really, I struggle with this one, actually, because how can you have this tattoo on your chest for 20 years and have no idea what it is? Just straight up. So I'm a skeptic, as you know. I'm an agnostic. I always ask questions. Having said that, I think he has a real chance of winning, unlike Janet Mills, unlike any of the sort of regular politicians, because he does speak from the heart. He speaks from the gut. And it resonates with people, especially who are just sick and tired of the same old politics. So, I think he has a real chance of winning there if people can get past, especially progressives, can get past that problematic thing, not just the tattoo, but things that he said on social media, critical of Black people and how they don't tip, that sort of thing. He's got a lot of explaining to do, but if he's able to get past that, that's the kind of a populist that can carry the day.
Well, this is what I would say about that, Chuck. I think those issues that you raise could be problematic for him in a Democratic primary, but they won't hurt him at all in a general election, because Republican voters are not going to find, and it's not a swastika. I mean, they call it, see, this is the New York Times, I felt really and Bruni, because they don't like Plattner because he is an economic populist. Right. But they glom onto the social, the cultural issues because they feel that that's more acceptable than saying, well, we don't like him because he would raise taxes on the people who advertise in our newspaper. That they can't say. So instead, they talk about what they call his social media outbursts and what they call a Nazi tattoo, which it's true. It was a symbol, but it wasn't like a swastika. I agree that those two issues could be problematic in a primary, but would not hurt him in the least. And if anything would help him, would give him some patina of authenticity among many disaffected white working class voters, and Maine, I believe, is the whitest state in the nation. So I don't see those issues, or maybe Vermont is maybe Maine is second. It's close, being a problem for him in the general, which is the opposite of what Bruni says. So I like Plattner. I hope he wins. One final point. If you look at the billionaire class, if you look at all the support that Wall Street gave Andrew Cuomo, they don't care about the fact that he was, slapping fannies and killing grannies. They don't care about any of that. They only care about whether his policies are going to make their lives even more cushy, if they're going to have even more than they already have of their ill-gotten gains. And I think we on the left have to say, is this person's policies going to be the best for us, or aren't they? And it would seem, and I believe it, that Graham Plattner's policies will be best for poor, struggling, and working people.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's helpful just to remind ourselves, where fascism comes from, because this ideology really is, I would just call it Machiavellianism on steroids, right? Which is the pursuit of power, the consolidation of power, and the expansion of power. It's all about power. It's all about calculation, right? It's an amoral ideology. It's devoid of morality. It's devoid of values other than the pursuit of power. And that's what's coming at us. And that's what's been coming at us for quite some time. And this is where the Democratic Party is so confused. The leaders in particular are so confused because they're so attached to the donor class. And they're all about the next election, right? It's all focused on the next election cycle mindset, as opposed to what we're talking about, which is the needs of the American people, the core needs, the core economic needs. And then, like we said, if you don't address those, then the Constitution is vulnerable. Social issues are vulnerable. All the other cultural issues, social issues are at stake and open the door again for this very, very cynical ideology known as fascism, which brings together like the three cornerstones, right? State corporatism, the marriage of the state, the government and corporate power, as well as the weaponization, in particular of Christianity. Christian nationalism is a contradiction, right? You can't be both a Christian and a nationalist, but that's in fact one of the core ideologies of fascism in the United States. And then we also have the third piece, which is white supremacy or white nationalism, and sort of the weaponization of racism. So the weaponization of religion, the weaponization again, racism, religion, and the economic structure. That's where we are right now, and that's the inability of people to have eyes wide open. I would refer to the Democratic Party leadership, which I put in quotations because that's an oxymoron too, is that they're not eyes wide open. They're eyes wide shut, because they can only see solutions through the next election cycle, as opposed to building a vision which would actually enhance your chances of winning the election, right? So, I mean, it's just backward thinking. That's what's holding us back.
All right, we talked about, you brought this up. I didn't, honestly, this election went way over my head. I knew there was a race in Minneapolis for mayor that involved the progressive Omar Fateh, I believe, and he lost. But I wasn't following Seattle, and yet we did, on the left. Well, should we call this a victory for the left, Chuck? Katie Wilson's win.
For the American left, yeah. And while we're on it, just to say that the American left is actually pretty close to the center. I mean, within the context of global politics, our politics have leaned so far to the right that the center looks left. But the reality is that, I would refer to her as a social democrat, which I think is great, actually. And she has a lot of ideas that we were talking about earlier, childcare, housing, education, that would really enhance the quality of life in Seattle, and also getting after the billionaire class, the millionaire class, to pay their fair share of taxes in Seattle. So yeah, this is absolutely a win. I take great encouragement. And I was in Berlin during that election with my son and his girlfriend, both of whom lives in Seattle. So I got a bit of an earful on Katie Wilson, which I was really happy to. And it was still a stunning upset. I don't think people saw this coming. And even my son and his girlfriend said that they were surprised with the outcome, but they're thrilled.
Yeah, I think it looks good. The problem, Seattle has a lot of issues. They're starved for cash because of cuts to the wealthiest there, and the billionaire class in Seattle is screaming like a stuck pig. They're all saying, just like the Wall Streeters, the tech bros up there, and
right.
The Great Pacific Northwest are all going to move out. They're going to move to Bellevue, whatever. They're going to get out of Seattle. I say go ahead, leave. We've got plenty of good real estate here, and it'll reduce housing prices a little bit if those mansions aren't being bid up by the billionaires. So I agree. They've got to figure out a way, though. And she says she would raise tax on the wealthy, figure out how to do that and get it through the city council. Do you think, but yes, these are really important. Progressive taxes, universal child care, cheaper mass transit.
Yep.
What is it? World Socialist website calls those minor reforms. And here's why, I had an issue with that term, minor reforms: more affordable housing, emergency assistance for the homeless. Those have the potential to really improve life for those who are struggling, for those at the bottom of the poll. So I don't like to call those minor, even though I understand, as you were pointing out to me, they're minor in the sense that they don't seize power from the capitalist.
Right. It's not really systemic reform, and it's not leaning into what you and I both understand socialism to mean, which is that it's the state, or in the case of Seattle, the city, that would take over the entire economy of the city. That's where the World Socialist website you're talking about, that's their starting point, right? That's their frame of reference. So, compared to that frame of reference, of course, it's relatively minor what she's doing, but I don't see it that way. I think we're on the same page. This is really a significant breakthrough, and has the potential to then model solutions at the municipal level, at the state level, regional level. Again, this is what we need to be doing on healthcare, as opposed to the vast majority of folks who work on single payer think that, let's just get it done at the national level. Bingo, it's all done. And that's just not the way that our politics are organized right now. I mean, the structure of money in politics is such that you've really got to model things at the local level, and at the state level and the regional level, I think, before we get to national solutions. That's just where we are right now. That's my political reality. I've been here for over 2 years, almost 2.5 years, lobbying on Capitol Hill, and it's really difficult to break into that bubble. As I think you've spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill. It's very difficult to get serious conversations with national legislators and actually taking their legislative roles seriously. It's all about communications and fundraising in the next election cycle, primarily.
Well,
right?
You write some $7 million checks, Chuck, and they'll be happy to entertain you.
Sure. It's gonna bounce from here to the moon, but I'll write a $7 million check. Yeah, absolutely. That was the way I was able to get to a Republican legislator, was dropping $250 that I don't have, but I was able to fundraise that in order to get into an event, and that opened the door for a meeting with this member's legislative director, and that's the game. And that's, I'm not happy about that, but I wasn't going to get a meeting otherwise.
It's pay for play for sure. Just to finish off the conversation from my end, and then I'll ask for your last word as we approach the end of the hour. This is from the World Socialist website, and really struck me what they said, because this I fully agree with. There's enormous outrage at the two-party system and capitalism as a whole, growing support for socialism. I would say enormous outrage at this kind of crony capitalism, this corrupt capitalism, winner take all, and the winner so often is a crook. That is what people are so upset about. Right. And I think what we do want is socialism for the poor. You're saying we have it's not even really capitalism for the wealthy. It's socialism. They're bailed out whenever they run into difficulties. I mean, you've been touching on this the whole time, Chuck, but just any kind of final word on how either the Democrats or leftists, or perhaps where my heart is, an alternative to the the duopoly, take advantage of this outrage that the American people so understandably are feeling.
Yeah. Well, we're in a moment, in my view, of opportunity. I know people are focused so heavily on the crisis that we're in, and totally, I get that. I understand that. But we also need to see and understand, as all great societies do, that out of crisis comes opportunity, right? I know it's a bit of a hackneyed expression, but it's true, is that we need to step back from the hair lighting events, that are happening around us. I mean, this is the point of this fascist project, right? It's I call it fire hose fascism. Right? I think Bannon uses the term "flood the zone," which gets people overwhelmed, and you're trying to deal with it. It's like whack-a-mole, right? You're trying to knock down all these crises, and meanwhile, they're robbing the bank behind your back. And what we need to do is step back and realize that we need to pick and choose our battles, for sure. But mostly, in my view, there's just an utter lack of strategic development and strategic visioning and strategic thinking. In particular, you talk about the political left. I call it the nonprofit industrial complex. These are now the social justice organizations. These are my friends. These are people I work with as closely as I can. But I'm begging them all to step back and work with me, work with us in developing a strategy that will get us through the present. Because if you don't have a future vision, how can you make strategic decisions in the present? If you don't see a future of accomplishing a justice-based society, then what are you doing? And the reality is that organizations are just so beholden, and they're stuck with the money as well, right? I mean, this is the organization problem, is that if your focus is on taking care of your organization, you're not even seeing the bigger picture. You're actually not even functioning and centered on your own purpose for existing to begin with. What's the mission of your organization? A lot of folks are losing sight of that. So I think it's important that we recognize that we have an opportunity, and it requires a lot of work. I mean, this is not a comfort zone for most people to actually think about and work on strategy. People talk strategy all the time, but the reality is that it's very difficult for people to understand what that actually is. And I hope this doesn't come across in a condescending way. For me as a teenager, I've shared this with you and your audience before, is that I was turned on to politics. In particular, I was awakened and radicalized in 1968 when Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy and the Tet Offensive and Richard Nixon came down the pike, and there was global revolution. I was 8 turning 9 that year. But really what woke me up was reading Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward. And I would encourage anybody who's interested in just taking a look at that short novel. It's a future utopian vision that's put forward by this writer from a late 19th century perspective. And you see the future when society is centered on taking care of each other. Fundamentally, that's what we're talking about. That just taking care of each other, taking care of our planet, taking care not to be fighting in warfare and so forth, but just the reverse. And the question is, how did we get there? And that's what this book does. It asks the question from the future perspective, how did we get there? Looking backward, what did we do in terms of leadership and communications and building alliances and coalitions and understanding and relationships and so forth? That's strategy. That's what actual strategy is. And it's very difficult, I think, for a lot of people who are sort of caught up in their organizational cycles, as well as the frenetic nature of our politics coming at us right now. So just hope people, step back, take a deep breath, take a look at looking backward as a starting point. Take a look at our websites that are posted on the screen here, and just track with the work that we're doing. We have to build a strategy, and it only works if you can see that future vision.
I want to thank Chuck Pennacchio so much for joining me. What an honor to have him. What a treat to have this in-depth conversation with someone that knowledgeable. I'll be back tomorrow. It is not going to be a usual free-for-all. We'll have Carlos on. It'll be a Friday with Carlos. Everybody who's watching, listening at any time, thank you so